The water was still warm on Emily's skin when she stepped out of the shower that Saturday morning. She quickly reached for her robe, wrapping it around herself as drops slid down her neck and onto her shoulders. She tied the belt tightly and ran a hand through her damp hair, pushing it back from her face. She wasn't expecting anyone, so when a sudden knock echoed through the house, she froze. For a second, she thought she had imagined it. The knock came again, steady this time, not hurried but firm enough to stir her heart into a faster rhythm. Emily padded through the hallway, her bare feet soft against the wooden floor. She glanced at the clock on the wall, barely past 9. No deliveries were scheduled, and none of her friends ever dropped by unannounced. A third knock came, lighter than the first, almost hesitant. Pulling the robe tighter, Emily peeked through the window beside the door. Standing on her porch was Ethan, her neighbor's son. He wasn't a boy anymore. She remembered the gangly teenager who used to mow his parents' lawn, always with headphones around his neck and a grin too wide for his face. But that boy had grown. Now, standing outside her door, was a man in his mid-20s, taller, broader, with a kind of confidence in the way he carried himself. The sight made Emily's stomach flutter in a way she hadn't expected. She opened the door slightly, careful to keep the robe close. "Ethan?" Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Is everything all right?" He looked up quickly, his eyes widening just a little, then darting aside, as if he hadn't expected her to answer so quickly. His expression was polite but nervous, like he was balancing on the edge of something unsaid. "Oh, hi Emily, I'm sorry to bother you. My mom's baking and she ran out of flour. She asked if you had some." Relief washed over her, and she let out a quiet laugh. "Of course. Wait here, I'll grab it." She almost closed the door but stopped, realizing it might be easier to let him in while she searched the pantry. "Come inside, it won't take long." He stepped into the living room, glancing around like he hadn't been there in years. The house was neat, though quieter than it used to be when her son still lived at home. Family photos lined the shelves, and a vase of flowers sat on the coffee table. Ethan's gaze lingered on a framed picture of her at a picnic years ago, smiling with her husband before the divorce. Emily moved quickly into the kitchen, pulling open the cabinet. She found the bag of flour and carried it back to him. As she handed it over, their fingers brushed lightly. It was nothing, just a simple accident, but the contact made her pulse quicken. She tucked her hand back, hoping he hadn't noticed. "Thank you," he said, holding the bag close. He gave a small smile, the kind that still held a trace of the boy she remembered. "You're welcome," she replied, but something about his presence unsettled her, not in a bad way, but in a way that reminded her she was suddenly aware of herself. Her damp hair, her robe, the quiet house around them. It had been a long time since she'd felt that awareness. He didn't rush to the door right away. His eyes moved once more across the living room walls. "You haven't changed much," he said finally, his tone casual but carrying something beneath it. Emily let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "That's kind of you, but I definitely feel like I've changed plenty. Time has a way of showing itself, Ethan." He looked back at her then, his gaze steady in a way that made her shift slightly on her feet. "Not as much as you think," he answered quietly. The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear, searching for something lighter to ease the tension. "Well, tell your mom I'll be waiting for a slice of that pie when it's done." That made him smile again, softer this time. He nodded, holding the flower a little tighter. "I'll let her know. Thanks again." He walked toward the door, and Emily followed, opening it for him. The morning air drifted in, cool against her still warm skin. He stepped onto the porch, pausing for a second as if he wanted to say something else, but then he simply gave her another polite smile and headed back toward his house. Emily closed the door gently, leaning against it as soon as it clicked shut. Her heart was still racing, though she told herself it was silly. It was only Ethan. Just the neighbor's son running an errand for his mom. Nothing unusual, nothing to think twice about. And yet, as she walked back to the kitchen, she couldn't shake the sound of his voice when he'd said she hadn't changed. She couldn't shake the way his eyes had lingered on her, not with the casualness of a neighbor, but with the attention of someone who saw more than he should. She stood still for a moment, staring at the counter where the flower had been. The morning felt different now, heavier, charged with something she couldn't quite name. She told herself she was imagining it, that it was just an ordinary favor on an ordinary day. But deep down, she knew something had shifted, something she hadn't expected when she first heard that knock at the door. The robe around her shoulders suddenly felt thinner, less like a shield and more like a reminder of how exposed she had been when she opened that door. She tried to laugh it off, shaking her head at her own thoughts. But as she moved through the house, she realized she was still listening for the sound of his footsteps outside, as if a part of her wanted him to knock again. The following day passed quietly, yet Emily found her mind circling back to the moment at the door. She busied herself with laundry, vacuuming, and grocery lists, but every so often, Ethan's words replayed in her head. "You haven't changed much." Simple, almost casual. But the way he had said it, the way his eyes had lingered, had stirred something in her chest she thought was long gone. By late afternoon, Emily decided she needed fresh air. She stepped out into her backyard with a cup of tea, letting the sun warm her face. Across the fence, she could hear laughter, Ethan and his mother talking as they worked in their garden. She sipped slowly, telling herself not to think too hard, not to read too much into a neighbor's kindness. But when she caught a glimpse of him carrying a tray of seedlings, his sleeves rolled up, smiling at something his mother said, she felt that strange flutter again. That evening, just as the light began to fade, there was another knock at her door. Emily's pulse quickened even before she opened it. Ethan stood there once more, not with flour this time, but with a small plate covered in foil. "Mom insisted I bring this over," he explained, holding it out. "It's apple pie. She said she owes you a slice." Emily smiled, relief and nervousness tangling together. She didn't have to, but thank you. She took the plate, careful not to brush his hand, though she noticed the way he hesitated before letting go. He didn't turn to leave right away. Instead, his eyes traveled over the photos on the wall again, the ones she knew by heart, but hadn't really looked at in years. Pictures of her son at different ages, her husband back when the marriage was whole, snapshots of barbecues and family trips. Ethan studied them as though each one meant more than it should. "You always had such a warm house," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't expected. Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, stepping a little closer to the framed pictures. "When I was younger, I loved coming over here. Your house always felt alive. My mom's is nice, but yours had laughter. Even now it feels the same. Like it remembers." Emily's throat tightened. She hadn't thought about her home that way in a long time. Most days it felt quiet, even lonely. To hear him describe it so fondly made her chest ache. "You make it sound like something magical," she said softly. He glanced back at her, his eyes meeting hers for a little too long. "It was, and you were part of that. You made it feel that way." The words landed harder than she expected. For a moment, Emily didn't know what to say. She shifted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That was a long time ago, Ethan. Things change." He nodded, but his gaze didn't waver. "Not everything changes." The silence stretched, not heavy but thick with unspoken things. Emily tried to move it back to lighter ground. "Well, I should put this pie in the kitchen before I eat the whole thing standing here." She gave a small laugh, though her voice trembled just enough to betray her nerves. He smiled faintly, almost knowingly. "All right, enjoy it. I'll see you around." She closed the door after he left, but her hands lingered on the frame. The warmth of his words clung to her. She carried the pie to the counter, but she wasn't hungry anymore. Instead, she sat at the table, staring at the plate, hearing his voice in her head again. "You made it feel that way." The next day, she found herself glancing out the window more often than usual. She noticed when Ethan left for a jog, when he carried groceries in for his mom, when he stopped to talk to a friend on the sidewalk. Each time, her pulse ticked up in ways she couldn't explain. She told herself it was silly, that he was only being kind, but deep down she knew it wasn't just kindness. It was something more. Later in the week, she ran into him at the mailbox. He had a camera slung over his shoulder, his hair slightly messy from the breeze. "You take photos now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. He smiled, almost sheepishly. "Yeah, just started a few months ago. It helps me see things differently." "Like what?" she asked, curious. "Like how light falls on faces. Or how a moment can be ordinary but still mean something." His eyes lingered on hers as he spoke, and she felt the words settle in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. Emily nodded, pretending her breath hadn't caught. "That sounds beautiful," he grinned, lifting the strap on his shoulder. "Maybe one day I'll show you." Their conversation was brief, but it stayed with her. That night, she found herself in front of the mirror, studying her reflection in a way she hadn't in years. Her hair, though streaked with silver now, still fell gracefully. Her eyes, though lined with age, still held warmth. She wondered what Ethan might see if he pointed his camera at her. Would he find the woman she once was? Or would he see something she had forgotten about herself? The thought unsettled her, but it also gave her a flicker of something she hadn't felt in so long: anticipation. When she climbed into bed, the house quiet around her, she realized her heart was beating too fast for someone who had only talked to a neighbor at the mailbox. She told herself to sleep, to stop overthinking. But as she closed her eyes, Ethan's words came back once more. Not everything changes. And for the first time in years, Emily wondered if he was right. The weekend came with a sky that glowed soft and golden. Emily spent the morning tending her roses, careful with the thorns, her hands busy, but her mind restless. She tried not to linger on Ethan, yet the thought of him seemed stitched into everything. The sound of footsteps outside, the laughter drifting from his porch, even the smell of fresh-cut grass. She told herself it was nothing, just neighborly kindness. But the truth pressed closer with each passing day. She felt alive again, and it was because of him. By afternoon, she carried a basket of clippings inside when there was another knock on the door. Her heart skipped before she even answered. And there he was, Ethan, hair tousled from the breeze, that same camera slung over his shoulder. "Hi," he said with an easy smile. "I was wondering, do you have a few minutes?" Emily blinked. "For what?" He held up the camera. "I thought maybe I could take your picture." Her first instinct was to laugh, but the seriousness in his eyes stopped her. "Me? Why?" "Because," he said simply, "I think you'd make a beautiful photograph. And because sometimes people forget how they look to the world." The words unsettled her in the gentlest way. She hesitated, clutching the basket tighter. "I don't know, Ethan. It's been years since I've stood in front of a camera like that." "Then maybe it's time again," he said, his voice soft but steady. "No pressure, just let me show you." Something in his tone disarmed her. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "All right, just one." He smiled, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. They stepped out to the porch, the light falling perfectly across the old wooden steps. Ethan adjusted the strap around his neck, his movements calm, almost reverent. "Sit here," he said, gesturing to the step. She sat, smoothing her dress nervously. Her heart thumped harder than it should for something so simple. Ethan lifted the camera, then lowered it again, studying her. "Relax. Don't think about the lens. Just be yourself." She tried to, though it wasn't easy. "That's harder than it sounds." He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Then think of something that makes you happy." She thought of laughter that once filled her home, of sunlight through curtains, of mornings when life felt lighter. Slowly, without meaning to, she smiled. The shutter clicked. Ethan lowered the camera but didn't stop looking at her. "That's it," he murmured. "That's you," Emily's chest tightened. She hadn't been seen like that in years. Not as a mother, not as a neighbor, not as someone moving through chores and routines, but as herself. Just herself. He took a few more shots, each one easier than the last. Her shoulders loosened. Her smile became real, her gaze steadier. She forgot to be self-conscious. And when he finally lowered the camera for good, there was something unreadable in his expression. "You're even more than I remembered," he said quietly. Emily swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She wanted to thank him, to dismiss it, to change the subject, but none of the words came. Instead, she asked, "Can I see?" He hesitated, then handed her the camera. She looked at the screen, her breath catching. It was her face, yes, but softer, warmer, almost radiant. The lines around her eyes weren't flaws, but stories. The silver in her hair shimmered like light itself. She saw herself as she had never allowed herself to, whole, present, alive, Ethan. Her voice trembled. "How did you—" "I didn't do anything," he said gently. "That's you. You just needed someone to remind you." Her throat ached, and she quickly handed the camera back, afraid of the feelings rising inside her. "Thank you," she whispered. For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with something unsaid. Then Ethan broke it softly. "You don't have to thank me. You've given me enough already." Emily frowned lightly. "What do you mean?" He looked away, as though searching for the right words. "When I was younger, when things were hard at home, your kindness meant more than you knew. You probably don't remember, but you were the first person who made me feel like I mattered. That doesn't go away." Her heart clenched. She remembered vaguely afternoons when Ethan would wander over as a boy, quiet and withdrawn, how she'd offer him cookies or ask about school. Small gestures she never thought twice about. To hear him now, giving them such weight, made her eyes sting. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You didn't need to," he replied, finally meeting her gaze again. "But it stayed with me." The honesty in his voice shook her. She wanted to step back, to shield herself from the intensity, but she couldn't move. She stood rooted, the air thick with everything she couldn't say. At last, she drew in a breath. I should get back inside." He nodded, though something flickered in his expression. Something almost like disappointment. "Of course. Thank you for letting me take the photos." She offered a faint smile. "Thank you for showing me something I forgot." As she stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind her, her pulse refused to settle. She leaned against the wood, pressing her palm to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. The camera flashes still echoed in her mind, but more than that, it was his words. "You were the first person who made me feel like I mattered." The weight of it lingered long after he left. She knew deep down that something had shifted between them. And no matter how much she tried to push it away, she also knew she didn't want to. That night, she set the photographs in her thoughts like hidden treasures. For the first time in years, she saw herself through another's eyes, and it changed everything. The following days passed with an odd rhythm Emily couldn't explain. Her life looked the same from the outside, morning walks, gardening, small errands, but inside everything felt different. Every sound from next door stirred something in her. Every glance toward Ethan's house made her heart skip. She told herself it was nothing, just gratitude, just the warmth of being seen again. But late at night, lying awake, she couldn't deny it. His words and his photographs had unsettled her in ways she hadn't felt for years. On Saturday afternoon, Emily was rearranging books in her living room when another knock came. She froze, already knowing who it would be. Her pulse quickened as she opened the door, and there he stood. Ethan, casual in a gray t-shirt and jeans, holding a small envelope. "Hi," he said, his voice easy but his eyes nervous. "I printed the photos. Thought you might want to keep them." Her breath caught. "You didn't have to—" "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. She took the envelope, her fingers brushing his for an instant that lingered longer than it should. "Thank you," she whispered. "Can I come in for a minute?" He asked. She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." Inside, Ethan looked around the room like he remembered it from long ago. His gaze softened when it landed on the familiar furniture, the framed pictures of Emily's family, the gentle touches that made the house feel lived in. "It's like nothing's changed here," he said quietly. "Sometimes change feels too heavy," she admitted. "So I hold on to the things I can." He nodded, understanding more than his age should allow. She sat on the couch opening the envelope. The print slid into her lap, and with trembling fingers she lifted the first one. Her breath stopped. There she was, captured in soft daylight, her smile unguarded, her eyes bright. She didn't look broken or forgotten. She looked alive. Ethan had managed to draw something out of her she thought was gone. Ethan, her voice cracked. I don't even recognize myself here. That's because, he said, sitting across from her. You're seeing yourself the way I do. The room grew still. She set the photos down carefully, unable to meet his eyes. Why do you say things like that? She whispered. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, steady. Because they're true. Her chest ached, and she finally looked up. His gaze held hers with a weight that left no room for denial. She felt exposed, as if he could see not just her face, but everything she tried to hide. Her loneliness, her longing, her quiet hope. You can't, she said suddenly, her words rushed. You can't look at me like that. She stopped, searching for the right words. I'm not who you think I am. I know exactly who you are, Ethan replied. You're the woman who offered a lonely kid a safe place years ago. You're the person who never stopped caring, even when life was unkind to you. And you're more beautiful now than you've ever been. Her eyes stung. She wanted to push his words away, but part of her wanted to hold them close forever. Ethan, this isn't right. You're younger. You have your whole life ahead of you. He didn't flinch. And yet here I am, sitting here with you. Doesn't that mean something? The silence that followed was heavy, charged with everything neither of them dared to say. She wanted to tell him to leave, to protect herself, but she couldn't. She wanted to admit how alive he made her feel, but she was afraid. Instead, she whispered, You don't know what you're doing to me. His voice softened. Then let me show you. For a long moment, neither moved. The distance between them was small, yet it felt enormous. Emily's heart thundered, her breath shallow. She was caught between fear and longing, between the past that held her and the future that suddenly seemed possible. Finally, she shook her head, breaking the spell. I can't, she said, her voice trembling. Ethan leaned back slowly, respect in his eyes even as disappointment flickered. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. She swallowed hard. You didn't. That's the problem. The honesty of her words hung in the air. He looked at her, really looked, and then gave a faint smile. I'll go. But Emily, don't shut the door on yourself. You deserve to be seen. And with that, he rose, leaving her sitting with the photographs in her lap, her heart pounding like it hadn't in years. When the door closed, Emily pressed a hand over her eyes. She felt a storm of emotions, fear, guilt, but also something she hadn't dared to feel for a long time, hope. Ethan had stirred feelings she thought were buried forever. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew one thing with certainty. She couldn't go back to the emptiness she had before. That night, she placed the photographs by her bedside. In the quiet darkness, she traced the outlines of her captured smile, and for the first time in a very long while, she whispered to herself, Maybe it's not too late.